Welcome to the Viewsroom on Zoom with Pfif and AWAC. I'm your host, Kat White, aka AWAC, and I'm here with Jim Pfiffer, also known as Pfif, or as I like to call him, Pfif Daddy.
Hello, folks.
In addition to being friends, we used to work together at Elmira Star-Gazette as journalists and columnists. This is our first episode together, but hopefully we'll do these video podcasts once a month, offering our observations and perspectives on a range of topics that interest us from the perspective of two former journalists. We may even have some special guests join us occasionally.
Cool.
In this episode, we'll tell you a little bit about ourselves, where the nicknames came from, and talk a little bit about something that's near and dear to both of us that's faced a lot of scrutiny lately, the art of comedy. Good morning, Jim.
Morning, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Wonderful.
So you want to start off telling us how you started working at the Star-Gazette and got a gig as a humor columnist?
Sure. I went to college I wanted to be a pediatrician. I realized in college that partying and women were a little more important than my grades. I realized I wasn't cut out to be a doctor. Started working for the college newspaper, writing for them, became editor of it, graduated, tried to get a job with some local dailies, but they wouldn't hire me because I didn't have a degree in journalism. So I started a free local sports newspaper called the Sports Section. Very well received. Certainly was a need for it. Didn't know how to run a business, so that folded. But I looked at that as my journalism education. And there I got a job with the Towanda Daily Review, Star-Gazette, where we worked together, worked at USA Today for a while, and with some other Gannett newspapers. I had a humor column when I was in college, and it was very popular. Always wanted one at the Star-Gazette, and the editors wouldn't give it to me. And back in, I think it was in about 1990, I was at another Gannett newspaper temporarily. It was going from a twice a week to a weekly, and they had a lot of us reporters, editors down there helping do that transition. They wanted to hire me, and the Star-Gazette didn't want me to be hired. He said, "What do you need?" I said, "Well, I'd like a raise. I'd like a humor column," and that's how I got it.
Wow. So that was quite a journey to get to that.
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was.
Okay. And in addition to doing the humor column, you still were also writing general news stories.
Yeah, at AWAC, and as you know, he's worked there long enough to cover everything. Most of the time, I was the cops, courts, and prisons reporter. I was a feature editor or a feature writer for a while. I had a health beat I covered for a while. I had an education beat. So yeah, we pretty much did everything at the paper, which was good. It made it well rounded and an interesting job. But I really liked it being the cops and courts reporter.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, no matter what, when you worked there, you ended up doing, like you said, quite a few different positions. I started out very similar to you in that when I first applied at the Star-Gazette, they would not hire me because I had only an associate's degree at that time from Corning Community College and no actual journalism or, writing experience. But I finished up and got a bachelor's degree at SUNY New Paltz. And when I came back 2 years later, I ended up starting out as the news assistant there. So I basically answered the phones and wrote briefs about, the brief page where they congratulate the kids who graduated or gotten certain honors or, geez, it's so long ago that I can't even remember. And it was just, I did basically all the pickup
right
in different departments. And then I ended up becoming a features reporter. And when I left there about 10 years later, I was the special editions assistant editor and a columnist, just like you, except for we did a generational column I was on a rotation with a number of different journalists from our newsroom. But it was definitely such a great experience and such a family
yes, yeah,
experience. I love the newsroom for that.
And anyway, as you know, that a lot of our fellow reporters and editors did not have degrees in journalism.
Right.
I just always thought you had to be curious, have thick skin, and be able to write and teach yourself as you go along. And that's what I was. I was self-taught as are you. So you don't always need a journalism degree. And some of the reporters who did have journalism degrees couldn't write their way out of a paper bag.
Exactly. I was going to say some of the most renowned now journalists were, self-taught and had no real formal education. They just fell into the field because they needed a job and it seemed like an interesting type of job and it fit their lifestyle or their personality,
Yeah.
their character. And they became some of the best in the business.
And one thing we got to make our viewers and listeners aware of is you don't get rich in journalism, at least not in the daily newspapers.
Yeah,
I was
right.
always surprised that everybody thought that we were very, very wealthy and making a lot of money. As you said, I think the rewards were maybe some public recognition, but just how interesting the job was. That
Exactly.
you were, covering so many things. I did so many things that other people haven't done in their life. First person stories to write about. I've been skydiving and bungee jumping in a submarine, saw autopsies and so on. So those were the rewards. But we certainly didn't get wealthy from it, and especially if you worked for Gannett, which I am still happy to say was one of the cheapest and miserly news organizations in the world.
Yeah, I was going to say I can't even. I'll be in trouble if we start going down that road. But but one of the things I was going to say is I think and it kind of goes into getting into how we got our nicknames is that I think one of the pretty much the only real I don't know, personality trait that you have to have is that you have to be curious. I
Yes.
mean, I've always been called nosy and I've always been embarrassed by that, growing up, but kids in high school and stuff would say that I was nosy. I like to say curious. I'm curious about things.
And AWAC, that's just such a wonderful trait to have because that means you're learning your whole life. You're curious. Why does that happen? What's going on? Sometimes it gets you in trouble, but I like it by being curious because you always want to learn and get answers to those questions. And as reporters, you know how to do the research, you know how to interview people to get that information. So it's a great trait to have.
I agree. I mean, it's taken me most of my life to come to that conclusion, but yeah, it is a really good trait to have, to always be gaining knowledge and seeking knowledge. Is a beautiful thing, and I think it keeps our minds going.
The other aspect is when I first meet somebody, I turn into a reporter and I start firing questions at me. And my
Yeah.
wife will often nudge me and say, "Hey, Jim, you're a reporter again." But one of the things I've learned, and I think most people know this, people like to talk about themselves. They enjoy those questions. They enjoy telling me about themselves or their job or their family and so on. So I'm learning about those people and building a friendship at the same time.
Exactly. And really, if you're interested, pretty much most people have a really, really interesting life. They have a really interesting story, more than one,
Yep.
really interesting stories. Um and if you're interested in that kind of stuff and taking the time to get to know people and get to know their stories, there are a lot of really cool stories out there.
Yep, I agree with you. I mean, my editor always say that everybody's got at least one interesting story, and I agree with you, AWAC. They have scores of them. You lead a lifetime. Yeah, you're gonna experience a lot of things. Have some great stories to tell. Good, bad, ugly, and sad.
Exactly. But getting back to curiosity and the familial environment of the newsroom, you want to tell everyone how I got the name AWAC and what that stands for, since
Sure. So
like
AWAC is a military acronym that stands for Airborne Warning and Control System. It's a large airplane. If you've ever seen pictures of it, it looks like it has a big frisbee on top of it. It flies up in the air and it can monitor and control troops on the ground, aircraft, radio traffic. It knows everything that is going on within a very large area, and that's exactly what you did in the newsroom. So that's why I gave you the name AWAC, because you were always aware of everything going on, who was doing what, asking questions, keeping control. So I think it's a badge of honor for you to be called AWAC. And folks, I need to tell you this, and AWAC is going to deny it, but she was my secretary, and she had to do what I told her to do, and she never did.
He wishes that I was his secretary. That's it. But I did help him. I was like an assistant because I did help him plenty of times gather intel. I think number one, I had probably the best seat in the house where my desk was located most of the time because I was between the reporters and the copy desk. So I could overhear kind of the editors' conversations about stories that were coming up, and then I could hear snippets of conversations because we worked in it was an open newsroom. If anyone's ever seen a true story about newsroom, you'll know that the newsroom layout is the reporters are very in an open area and the editors are have offices around, right?
Right. And then there are no partitions where it's a floor full of desks with reporters sitting a couple of feet from each other with phones ringing and typing going on. And it's a beehive of activity and noise. And AWAC was the queen bee of all that activity and noise.
Yes, I was. Yeah, and where did Pfif come from?
Well, the spelling of my name, Pfiffer, should be pronounced Pfiffer. Everybody screws the name up. I've been called Pfiffer, Pfiffer, Pisser, and a lot of other words I can't say. So just to shorten it to Pfif, where it came from, made it easier for people. So like you did, you call me Pfif Daddy. There's a good friend here who still calls me Piff Daddy, no matter how many times I correct him. And one of the detectives that worked for the sheriff's department that I worked with was always calling me Piper. Let's call Jim Piper, and I would correct him and say it's Pfiffer. So everybody got it wrong. So just to shorten it up and make it easier for me and for everyone else.
Yeah, I like it, and it has personality, just like personality, just in the name that just
Yep.
jumps out at me, just like you just jump out at people with your personality.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And most people listening, if they'll listen to this, are going to know that you are very humorous. You have a humor column currently. You've been doing one kind of in retirement, and you took some time off and have come back.
Yep.
Do you want to talk about that for just a minute and what comedy means to you?
Sure. So I always had a great sense of humor. Developed it from my mom and dad and my family. When I grew up as the oldest of 8 kids, when you have a family that big, if you don't have a sense of humor, you're not going to survive. But we moved so many times in the middle of school years. Very traumatic when you're young, move into a new school in the middle of the year, and you're the new kid, and the bullies would pick on me, and if I could make them laugh instead of punching me, we would become friends. So it was really a great tool to introduce myself and become friends with people. And I always realized that it was a skill I was born with, and I wanted to make something of it and to use it and enjoy it. That's
Mhm.
why I did the humor column in the paper. And then a couple of years ago, I started doing it on Facebook. I took a break over the summer, and it was great. I liked not having deadlines, not having to do it, but I just started itching. I had something there that I needed to fill, and I realized I needed to start writing again and start being humorous. So I back on Facebook. I also have a blog. It's the same column. It's called Full of Wit, in which I'm posting at least once a week, maybe twice a week, usually about just daily life, growing up, being a boomer. How when you write about politics, you just got to write the truth and the facts, and it's humor itself. So,
Oh my God. And hasn't that always been the case?
yep, yep, yeah, yeah. So I've always had a talent and an eye to see humor in everything. And I think I've mentioned this to you before, AWAC, that people are always saying, "Aren't you ever serious?" And I go, "Well, there are occasions when I'm serious, but isn't it fun to laugh?" And And on occasions when it's a sad, let's say at a funeral or another sad situation, if you can bring some levity into it and make people laugh, it lightens things up. You know, I've been asked to do a couple of eulogies for friends who've passed away, and I always weave humor into it, and the folks like hearing that. You know, it's sad, yeah, but laughing about the good times that we had together and things we did together is a much better way, I think, of doing a presentation. And again, if you make people laugh, that's rewarding. They like to laugh, so they're more apt to listen to you and pay attention to you when you're giving a presentation, because they know they're going to get some laughs, and that's going to be their reward.
You are absolutely right. And I had a couple points that I was going to make, but I just, in case anyone can hear the background, I have an English bulldog whose name is Henry, who's a heavy breather. So if it sounds like a stalker has suddenly come on the scene, that's just my English bulldog Henry, saying hello and making sure that I'm paying attention to him. But I definitely agree with what you said as far as comedy. I think it's a sense of release, you know,
Yep.
allows us to release our emotions in a way that's maybe more socially acceptable than crying in public, or we feel more comfortable that way at least.
And all the health effects that come from laughing. It lowers blood pressure. It relieves stress. It's actually exercise your diaphragm and your lungs when you're laughing. Just putting a smile on your face. It's good for you, I believe, physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
And I think even like aesthetically, because I think that when you smile, you have less lines in your face. I think it releases like, or you know, it keeps your face smoother. At least that's what I'm going with.
Yeah, I'll go with that. I don't mind saying my wrinkles are laugh lines. I'll go with that.
Yeah, I like that. And well, and people can't tell if you're laughing all the time. Your face is always all crinkled up and you know, nobody can see the wrinkles. um, but before we wrap up, I just wondered if you wanted to talk briefly about the whole Will Smith, Chris Rock thing. Because everyone else has, and we have especially, and I think you've made some interesting points about comedy and well, do you want to say something about it?
Sure. So humor is always at the expense of someone or something. That's what the joke is that it's making fun of someone or something.
Right.
And everybody, it's a sense, much like a sense of taste. Everybody has a different sense of humor. Everybody has a different sense of taste. I don't like anchovies. My wife does. Doesn't mean she's any worse than me or I'm any better. It's just a different taste.
Right.
Problem with humor is because it's at the expense of someone, folks will love to laugh until you make fun of them or something that is precious to them.
Right.
And that's where you run into problems. I've had people say to me, some of the columns I've written, oh, you went over the line that time, Jim. And my response is, I went over your property line for your sense of humor. My property lines are endless when it comes to a sense of humor.
Right.
And it really bothers me that people get upset because they don't like someone's joke or the humor or whatever they're making fun of. And I just say, well, then if you don't like it, so be it. Don't listen to it. Don't read it, but don't say I want to censor them because I don't agree with it.
Right.
That said, one of the things that I try to do is make fun of myself as much as possible, which is easy because I do a lot of dumb things. And laughing at myself certainly makes life a little more bearable and enjoyable. But it's just getting ridiculous now that stand-up comedians and shows and so on, when they go to colleges, they can't make fun of anything because it's politically incorrect. Political correctness has gotten in the way of humor, of having a good time, of pointing out some of the absurdities and weird things in life. And as we were saying, you're getting rid of laughter and all the great things that go with laughter. I say to those people, take a nerve pill, stop reading my column or stop watching this or stop going to that show. Don't tell that comedian he or she can't do that.
Right. Well, and for me, I think people really also just don't understand don't really have an understanding of comedy and what it is, because even we were talking about the Chris Rock special, and you were saying the parts that you liked, and there were some jokes that he did that you didn't like. And that's a point. I don't know. I'm a huge comedy fan. I've been to see, most of the big comics out there now. It's one of the things that my sister and I and my nephew do for birthdays, because we enjoy comedy. And I don't know that I've ever been to one show where I've laughed and loved every single joke that the comedian told. I mean, it's kind of like the situation of a stand-up or when you have those moments, are that there's a connection back and forth, you know what I mean? Or a relationship going on back and forth that you're making. And it's kind of like just having a conversation with any random person on the street. And some of the things that they say you're going to like, and some of the things that they say you're not going to like. But comedians, it's their job to go out there and poke fun at things. So to get offended at them doing their job is really weird. So it just seems so strange to me.
So you're right that the Chris Rock show, he was hilarious, and he started talking about abortion. Oh my God, that's not something you can make fun of. Well, he was making fun of it. He was saying he believes in it and supports it, and he made the comment, "I believe in killing babies," and to me that was like, ooh. I didn't really find that funny, but I'm not angry at him for him. I respect him for pushing the limits and being honest. But I didn't get mad and say, "Oh, I'm not going to listen to him anymore. That's wrong," and so on. It just wasn't. It didn't fit my sense of humor, and
Right.
that's it. So be it. But as I said, that takes a lot of courage to do that, and I respect him for that, and I wouldn't want anyone to ever say you can't do it just because you don't like it or you don't agree with it.
Exactly. Yeah. And for me, I thought this whole thing was brilliant. There were so many levels to this incident that happened, because you kind of learned, well, Will Smith definitely learned that there are consequences to your actions, and you don't control those consequences.
Yep.
Because this has been a year. I mean, this is something that we should not even really be on the radar, or should have just been a small story when it happened, or when it should be in the past by now. But
Yes.
Chris Rock took his time. He was in control at this point, and I've seen so many responses about his, how he must have been so angry and he must have been so upset. And I want people to put themselves in his shoes. He was attacked, and instead of returning that attack, he was the bigger person and stood up and continued on what was a ludicrous and insane incident that happened to him. And then he kept his mouth shut while everything swirled around for a year, like processing what that was like to be the bigger person, and to not defend yourself in that moment, physically or violently. And I just thought, his closing line about his mother raising him not to fight in front of white people was incredibly strong.
Yep.
And so I thought it was fantastic. I mean,
I agree with you.
yeah.
And AWAC, I mean, that was an example. I'd never seen that, of someone so angry with your sense of humor and what you said, that it ended up in violence. I mean,
Yeah.
I've never been hit or slapped for anything I've written or anything I've said funny. I've been hit, slapped, punched, and spit on for other things I've said that I probably deserve. But that was the ultimate. I had never seen that. I've read about Lenny Bruce and other comedians being arrested for what they said, but
Right.
to be punched or slapped for it, it's ridiculous. But that's the climate we're in now with this political correctness and this woke society. It frightens me that we are, first of all, getting rid of that amendment of free speech to be able to say what you want. You don't have to agree with the person, but let them speak their piece and say what they want. And I think there's a lot of problems. I think a lot of race issues. I think a lot of issues between the sexes exist because you can't talk openly about it and learn about it because you're so afraid of saying the wrong thing and being labeled a sexist or a racist. And so we continue to wallow in our ignorance because we can't talk about it.
Well, what I'm going to say is that, as I think folks can tell, that we have really interesting conversations. There's a lot there that you just mentioned. So I think that we definitely have a topic for our next show.
Exactly.
But we are winding down as far as time is concerned. So I wanted to just end it here only because we're running out of time. But I want to thank you so much for doing this with me because I think people can tell we have really interesting conversations with differing perspectives, and I think people are going to enjoy it. And I think we have a unique viewpoint because we were both journalists, and we are both still journalists.
Yep, and I thank you for that. And AWAC, that's one of the reasons I respect you and love you, is that it is easy for us to talk to each other and care about each other, which I think is important. And again, and I guess I want to leave with saying to our viewers and listeners one thing: AWAC really was my secretary, regardless of what she said. And matter of fact, I'm still her boss, but she doesn't listen to anything I say.
On that note, folks, hopefully we've said something interesting that'll make you think. Check out our next episode, which we'll do one monthly. I think we can work that in, right, Jim? You can do one a month, right?
Yep.
Okay. So catch us next time here at southerntierlife.com. I want to take a moment just to thank you, Southern Tier Life, which hosts the podcast, and our sponsors, Black Cat Media and Reed Media Group Radio. Thanks so much, folks. Until next time, have a great day.
Adios.